In just a few hours, former President Donald Trump is set to be arraigned in a federal court in Miami.
Trump will appear before the judge in connection to a 37-count federal indictment. He's accused of mishandling classified documents when leaving office and then lying to the FBI about it, as well as conspiring to obstruct justice. The former president is expected to plead not guilty to the charges.
We have a team of correspondents and contributors joining us from Miami to cover today's proceedings. We're going to start off with CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge. Morning, Catherine. You just spoke with Trump's attorney, Lena Haba. Now, what did she say to you about what we can expect with the proceedings today?
Well, Jim, and Lilia, good to be with you from Miami. What she told us in a nutshell is that the former president is really in a fighting posture. He's ready for the court appearance in the building behind me a short time from now. And she describes him also as having an understanding of the serious charges that he is facing in this criminal prosecution. She described the indictment from special counsel Jack Smith as very one-sided. The snippets in it, she said, did not present enough context, and that when the Trump legal team begins to tell their side of the story, the public will have a fuller understanding of the circumstances here and what they believe is a criminal case that should be quickly dismissed.
Catherine, I'm curious, given that this is a former president, are there any concessions that are done for him? How long is all of this expected to last? Hours, just pretty quick in and out?
Well, Lily, in some ways, this is a situation the nation has never been in before. The legal system, the judicial system has never been in before. But the process is going to be not that much different than most federal criminal defendants. Based on our reporting here at CBS News, talking with officials who are familiar with the situation at the courthouse, what they anticipate is the former president will present himself. He will not be arrested. He will then be processed by the U.S. Marshal Service. So we're kind of in the loose custody of the U.S. Marshals. We're told at this point they are not expecting that a mugshot will be taken, but instead his official government portrait will be uploaded. We do expect him to be fingerprinted, possibly a DNA sample also taken, but a pretty standard process with a few kind of changes or small tweaks because of his position.
Now, Catherine, the former president is looking at a 37-count indictment. Now, you talked about how his lawyers say it's thin, but we've heard from a number of people across the political spectrum, including people like Bill Barr and Chris Christie, saying actually it's a fairly significant and evidence-backed indictment. So what sort of consequences could Donald Trump face if he is convicted?
Well, Jim, the consequences can range from fines to pretty significant jail time. When you're looking at the willful retention of national defense information, there are very significant fines. The jail time can be between 5 and 20 years in some cases. But I think the charge that's the most problematic for the former president is this conspiracy to obstruct a federal criminal investigation that was allegedly with his aide, Walt Nauta. And what the documents say is that the two worked together to remove documents from the White House and then hide and conceal them. Obstruction is very serious. That can get you 20 years, up to 20 years in jail. And then I would also be very focused if I was on the defense team on this false statement allegation. False statements is used very frequently in these federal criminal investigations. It simply means that you've lied to a federal investigator in the course of the investigation. It's called 18 U.S.C. 1001. A single statement can get you 5 years in prison. And what often happens is that prosecutors, instead of doing it concurrently, they try and pile them up for a defendant in order to encourage them to cooperate and reach some kind of plea agreement.
You know, what's remarkable reading through the indictment, Catherine, about this case is the amount of times that there was an opportunity, according to the charges, to give the documents back. And all of those attempts just play an important role, not just from Trump, but from his co-defendant, Walt Nauta. Can you talk to us just a little bit about given what Jim was asking about, why are people so convinced that this is such a strong, such a heavy case? And how much does the fact that there were these different opportunities, that there were not just false statements according to the charges, but also people brought in to falsify in some way or to certify something that was inaccurate? I mean, talk to us a little bit about just how strong the case is.
Sure, it's a great question. I'll talk you through a couple of different points. I think first and foremost, there's the threshold issue of the classified documents. I've done a lot of reporting on the documents here. There are at least 21 top secret in these charges of unlawful or willful retention of national defense information. And some of them are at the highest level, these special access programs. These are government programs that are so secret, officials don't even publicly or privately acknowledge them. Others rely on spy satellite intelligence to do very granular imagery. So this is, really in some ways the most closely held secrets for the U.S. government. So that's number one. Number two is when you're looking at this conspiracy charge. When you look in the indictment, what you see in many cases is that they're trying to use the former president's own statements against him or the statements of his aide, Walt Nauta. For a prosecutor, especially with a high-profile client, some of the best evidence is using their own statements. So in this case, an audio tape where he's talking about this Pentagon-Iran memo that he apparently acknowledges he has not declassified. Also, discussions with an aide showing them a map, saying, well, it's kind of classified. I shouldn't be showing it to you, but I'm going to anyway. All of those actions, the statements of the former president, make it a much harder case for his lawyers to defend against.
Catherine Herridge in Miami for us. Great to have your understanding and your insight. Thank you so much.
And of course, this is not the first indictment, and similar to the last one, it doesn't seem to be slowing down Trump's support among GOP primary voters. Well,
that's according to the latest polling from CBS News. As of Monday, Donald Trump is polling at 61%, nearly 30 points above Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. But there are some Republican politicians who are beginning to express some doubt, including Paul Ryan, who spoke on CBS Mornings earlier today.
I think we want a nominee who's not weighed down with so much baggage in order to win this election. And it's really clear a lot of our suburban voters will not vote for Donald Trump.
Our chief election and campaign correspondent, Robert Costa, joins us now. Bob, Republicans have been speaking about the indictment. GOP hopefuls Chris Christie and Georgia Governor Brian Kemp both had statements. Let's listen to that and get back to you.
He is now going to put this country through this when we didn't have to go through it. Everyone's blaming the prosecutors. He did it. It's his conduct.
From what I read in the indictment, some serious things in there. Personally, I just have questions of, why things played out like it did. But look, I can't answer those questions. Those are questions that he's going to have to answer in the court of law, and I'll let that process move forward.
So far, we've heard from these three relevant voices in the GOP. I mean, do you expect that this is going to be more? I mean, how do you expect that that the indictment is going to play out in terms of all of those presidential hopefuls? Many of them, does it favor, does it affect them to support or not Donald Trump at this point? With your political wisdom.
Hopefully I have a little bit of it today out here in this sweltering heat in Miami. Good to be with you both. Calling around to a lot of the rival campaigns in the Republican primary race, running against former President Trump. It's evident to me, based on my reporting in the last few days, that they do smell blood in the water. Politically, they do believe that Trump could be vulnerable. The key word there is could, because they see the polling just as anyone else does publicly. They see their own private polling, that Trump remains the dominant force in the headlines in the presidential race, but there is a growing sense that Trump could be exposing himself to more legal challenges in Georgia down the line, another investigation from the special counsel on January 6th. So that's why I wanted to hear from Georgia Governor Brian Kemp yesterday, why I sat down with him remotely, because I wanted to get his real take on where things stand. And he said what's going on right now is a distraction for the Republican Party, and he had a warning for fellow Republicans: don't get bogged down in defending the Trump indictment or talking about the Trump indictment. He, in many ways, echoed what House Speaker Paul Ryan had to say this morning on CBS.
Bob, I'm just curious. In the 7-8 years you've had a really close eye on Donald Trump as a candidate, is this as much trouble as he's been in from your perspective? Is this as big a threat as he has faced from within the Republican Party?
It looks like Bob is having a little bit of trouble hearing us. Bob, let us know.
I can hear you now. I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Bobby, I was just
There's
asking.
a lot of chanting going on here.
Yeah, let me repeat the question for you. I guess I was just asking, given your perspective, how long it's been that you've had a close eye on Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. Does this mark the period of time within the Republican Party that there has been as much growing, substantial questioning as to his viability?
Jim, it's a good question. I was just joking with some other reporters around here. We're all gathered around this courthouse about how we've all been on the Trump beat now for nearly a decade. I remember going back to Trump Tower in 2013, 2014, and a lot of times Republicans thought he was vulnerable, but we've seen time and time again, he fights back, he climbs back. We'll see what happens this time.
All right, Bob, brave of you to keep the jacket so far. We will continue talking to you throughout the day.
And the indictment against former President Donald Trump deals with both the retention of classified materials as well as obstruction of a federal investigation.
Trump has repeatedly said that he did nothing wrong. However, federal prosecutors claim he's kept boxes containing top-level government secrets in storage closets, offices, in one of the bedrooms at his Mar-a-Lago estate, among other places.
So let's bring in David Aaron. He's a former federal prosecutor in the National Security Division, DOJ, and now senior counsel at the law firm Perkin Coie. David, thanks for joining us. Please, we're looking for some sense of understanding about the kind of information that was allegedly kept in those boxes so that we can assess, and I think this is what everything will revolve around in part, the damage that it would cause to the national security if those documents got into the wrong hands. What's your sense?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. As alleged in the indictment, and right now the indictment is just an allegation, the classified documents that are charged in the indictment include information about the defense capabilities of the United States and other nations. And those other nations could be allies or they could be adversaries. U.S. nuclear programs are apparently described in these documents. Unauthorized disclosure of this kind of information could endanger our own national security. It could put troops at risk. It can put intelligence sources and methods at risk if anyone had access to that type of information. And even just putting other nations' intelligence information at risk can ruin relationships or get in the way of relationships that we have with their intelligence services.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because, one thing is what's alleged in this case, but part of those allegations is just how vulnerable the documents could have been, that they were in an area that anybody could have gone there. So even if it's not included in the indictment, there's possibilities that other people could have been exposed. What does this mean for our diplomacy, for our trust among our overseas allies?
That's an important point. And classified information of any type is meant to be kept in a very secure location. And that accomplishes at least two things. One is it limits who can have access to it. And the other is it creates a record of who may have had access to it. So when that classified information is moved from an authorized secure location to an unauthorized or non-secure location, the government loses that access control and that insight into who accessed it. So other countries, other services may be more reluctant to share certain information because all they have to rely on really is the promise by the receiving government, in this case, the United States, that appropriate protections will be applied.
So one of the sort of important contexts that this case will play out in is the question of if this was just an average guy being charged, not a former president, sort of how this would unfold. In other words, let's take your average government worker accused of what former President Donald Trump is accused of. What's your sense, given what you understand about this indictment, of how this case would unfold?
Well, first, prosecutors have to decide whether there's a case at all. If prosecutors receive a report that someone has apparently or allegedly been retaining classified information or national defense information, they're first going to look at whether there are any indications that the person disclosed that information or planned to. If there aren't any, then the question is this retention of national defense information something that should be prosecuted, or should it be treated as a security violation? Many of these are treated as security violations, and a lot of that has to do with the circumstances under which the information was taken and kept, the nature of the information and the amount of it, how egregious a case it is. But a lot really has to do with how cooperative a subject is in helping investigators recover the national defense information, being very forthcoming about where it is, maybe even possibilities of access, helping track that down. So there are a lot of different factors that go into this kind of determination. And there are so few reported cases, there's not a lot to compare this one to.
David Aaron, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
And we will have much more on the Trump indictment all day here on CBS News. We'll have a special report starting at about an hour before the former president is expected to be arraigned. You can stream that right here on CBS News.